I'd like to thank, Tom and I would both like to thank you for, pulling this off, because our title somewhat reflects that we kept thinking this was planned a year ago, and we didn't want it to be, everything needs to be virtual in this world. And the joke is on us. It turned very much virtual. And because of the way that we work, the things that we look at, we wanted to emphasize natural reality, and hence the title.
Yes, we both draw our work from nature, and I'm really pleased to be here. We'd like to thank Barb and Katrina and all the great staff here at the Lansing Art Gallery for hosting this exhibit and giving us a chance to have our work out there and be seen.
Well, we are delighted to have you here. And just as a reminder for folks that there are still opportunities to schedule an appointment and come in and see the work in person. And you also can view and purchase the work online at our website. I know for me, there's nothing like seeing the work in person. So having that opportunity, I think, is really, really special. So I wanted to ask you both a few questions about your work. You both touched on this briefly in your introductions, but what themes define your work? I would say individually and then also collectively.
Well, I think the connecting thread is nature. We both draw a lot of inspiration from nature. Sally collects objects from nature. I tend to be inspired by viewing the natural places like that.
I think one of the benefits of becoming, good friends is
Would you turn that off?
broader, was very different from the way I tend to focus in and look at individual pods.
Thank you. Sorry about that. So Sally and Tom were telling us that both of their bodies of work, individually and collectively, are inspired by nature. And Sally in particular is very interested in the materials that are found in nature, using that. And I would say, Tom, it's probably safe to say that you're maybe not using materials in the same way that Sally's using, but you're reacting to your natural environment.
Yeah, the surroundings.
So, and kind of speaking to that, Sally, could you speak to what draws you to choose the materials that you do?
Well, we're going to transition and we'll have a chance to demonstrate some of our processes. And I was thinking, oh boy, I get to talk about paper because I love paper. But the other materials that I use besides paper, I've been kind of running through a list of fruits and vegetables and slicing and dicing and looking at interior structure.
Thank you. And we both sort of touched a little bit about this as a practicing artist during the pandemic, where our times have changed in terms of us being able to move through the world more freely. Have you noticed your practice has changed during this past year, or even more broadly over time?
As far as during the pandemic, and I think maybe I speak for both Sally and myself, some artists were very productive. We tended to back off a little bit, and I'm not sure the reason for that. I guess it was getting caught up in the news cycle and different things. But eventually, when the deadline for the show came, I really got busy. but my practice has changed over the years, and I think with most artists, you learn more about the materials you're working with, and it evolves how you handle the materials, and just your desire to get better and see things that you don't like in your work presently, then you want to grow and expand from that.
Mm-hmm.
I guess part of what I would let my audience know, who is my audience here? I was interested in weaving pretty early on, and I'm proud to say I was a college dropout, and I left school and ended up down in Mexico, learned how to weave with backstrap weaving with a native or with an indigenous person from Mexico. And I realized that I just really wanted to make stuff. I wanted to make stuff. And the bank won't give you money to just set up a studio and make stuff, but they'll give you money to go to school. A big loan, went into grad school, and it was kind of funny that I connected with the person that was teaching paper making more so than the person teaching the weaving component. So that's where a lot of my work changed in terms of fibers, because I was always tuned into fibers.
That's really interesting. I didn't realize that I know that you've traveled extensively, Sally. Has that informed your work as an artist?
I think it's informed me as a person. And one of the possible questions is, what do you tell a young artist? And my immediate response was travel, which it's a real difficult thing to do right now, but it allows you to see how you were trained, how you were brought up culturally, and until you see something different, I don't think you know how you've been taught. And I think that's a very important kind of thing for someone to kind of expand your horizon is through travel.
Absolutely. And for you, Tom, kind of nodding to that question, what kind of advice would you give to an emerging artist at really any stage in their practice?
I guess to not overlook any opportunity. It may not seem like something that would ever take you anywhere, but just if there's an open door, walk through it, and you'd be surprised how many more doors that will open.
I completely agree with that. I would say that the art world it's not terribly big. And so kind of getting the opportunity to connect
Yes.
With other folks in the art world. And I always find myself inspired by going to other art spaces too. And that kind of fuels my own practice. One more question before we move into the making component of this the question and answer portion today. So one of the questions that we had for you is, what do you want viewers to learn from your art? Sally, could you go first?
We were going to kind of hit on that as a conclusion, but one of the things, can we save that for a conclusion?
Absolutely, absolutely. I had that on there. This one is, it's one that I love asking is, how do you know when a work is finished?
And it says, leave me alone. No more.
For myself, the process toward the end of a painting is more time spent standing away from the easel and looking back at it and trying to figure out what bothers me, what just doesn't look right. Sometimes it's a little thing as much as making a little smudge on the pastel with my finger, walking back, and that'll be all it needs sometimes. So it's a lot of standing back and staring, and when things look fine, that's the time to button it up quick.
I had a friend who said sometimes thinking looks like you're not doing much. You know, it's sort of taking that moment of respite to just sort of let it settle in. I imagine that's something that is honed over the years too, and it's probably instinctual as well.
A lot of times I don't see my things necessarily as finished, set. If you saw my studio space, which you wanted to come see it and I wouldn't let you in because it is just pretty dense. That's a nice way of saying cluttered. But and I love this word audition, because sometimes I'll see something that was, sort of in progress, but how does it look combined with this or that or the other. And sometimes it's years before something is truly kind of found its mate and it's finished.
Mhm.
But yeah, you could come up sometime.
I love going into artist studios. It's like getting the sneak peek into the behind the curtains. Absolutely. So I'm so excited we have the opportunity not only to speak with you today and also to see your work here in the exhibit, but our viewers are actually going to get the opportunity to see each of you do a demonstration of your work. And we're going to start with Sally. Sally will be doing a demonstration of paper making. And so if I could welcome you, please bear with us as we transition cameras.
You forgot to turn them.
Okay. I mentioned that I really love paper making, and one of the things I wanted to share as much as anything is the versatility of it. And I brought kind of like Galloping Gourmet here, and one of the things that's really cool about paper making is it can be made with any kind of plant that has a fiber that's long enough that it can then reform and be strong. This would be something that's like a cotton fiber. This is something that's a little more interesting, I think, because it's a cooked plant. And then I also brought, this is something that's inner bark that's stripped from a mulberry tree. And that will give you a whole different kind of paper that, listen to the rattle of this and the strength of that, even though it's very thin. But what I'm demoing though is something that's similar to what I use for my sculptures. I'm gonna fix this out. And the basic tool for paper making is this, that's called a mold and a decal. And it's a screen mesh that then collects the paper pulp. And then this is the decal, which is like a corral, and it helps form the size of the sheet of paper and keep enough fiber on there so it's not just swishing away. So I've prepared the cottony kind of fiber and added some pigment to it. So we've got ready-made bat here. This is a cold water slurry. And nothing more fun than in the summer doing this outside and you get to play in the water just like a little kid. But I'm dispersing that fiber, that pulp, so that it's even, so that when it collects on the mold and the decal, it will be an even kind of layer of the fibers. I may want to put more pulp in there. You could, it's a pretty wet process. And if you don't like getting your hands in water, then this may not be for you. But what I'm then going to do is I need to get this transferred so I can make another sheet of paper, make another sheet of paper. And there's some really fun terminology. This is called couching. And for my friends that know how to make paper, they're going to be laughing. This is really thin. Didn't make the perfect sheet of paper, but that doesn't usually disturb me because I'm oftentimes just taking bits and pieces and tearing things and draping them over the form that I want to create. So This is one of my favorite kinds of structures. And I have to put a shout out to a friend, Margot, who has a vineyard. And she has been saving the grape stems for me because it got to the point when I first discovered them as a structured possibility. I was waiting till grapes went on sale, eating grapes till I couldn't hardly stand to look at a grape, drafted the help from friends who were also eating grapes and saving the stems. And thank goodness, Marco, thank you. We now have easy access to multiple, many grape stems. Okay, so I'm going to transfer this here. Show you how I get some of the forms. This is real tender when it's wet like that. So this is a down and dirty demo, not the traditional way of making beautiful sheets of paper. The other thing that I like about paper making is you can treat it as something where you're making sheets of paper, or you can model it, and it's a lot like clay. You can do castings. And I'm just using this kind of fake chamois to take out some of the wet, some of the moisture, so I can then pick it up and manipulate it. Yeah, we'll see if I've got, it's pretty wet still. Let's take a little more of the water out.
And Sally, what is the that white material that the paper is on?
Traditionally, that would have been a wool felt. And what I'm using is called Pellon. It's an interfacing. When you want to stiffen a cuff or a collar, if you're sewing a garment, this material, this Pellon, will do the trick for you. It's still flexible, but stiffens stuff. And part of the reason this is being a little pesky coming off is because it's so ultra thin, but you can see where I am able to pick it up, move it around. I'm draping it over my structure. And then I could just stop there, but it looked kind of funky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jazz it up, and I'm going to use this water and lightly help it form around the structure. Now this is also where another favorite tool is a turkey baster, and if I wanted to go back and plug in a hole or add some color, then I can kind of build up different layers with different colors. So here we've got the start of a sculpture, and here's, ta-da! This is what it would dry down to look like. And this doesn't have any glue in it or anything like that, and it's reasonably strong. Katrina was talking earlier about how delicate things seem, and to some extent, yes, but basically it's got more strength than what people realize. And that, my friends, is down and dirty how Sally makes paper. So,
Sally, you may have mentioned it and I just missed it, but what do you use for dyes for your paper?
I have switched over, coming from a fiber background or a weaving where you would dye fabrics. Over the years, the paper artists have realized that pigments work better than dyes. And I buy super concentrated, but it's aqueous dispersed, meaning it's liquid pigments that then mix right in. And what's really great, pigments, it works just like paints, that you can mix your colors, get any color that you want. So it's really super that way.
Have you ever used natural, like plants to derive color, or like seeds or something of that nature?
Yes, I have. In fact, the sample that I brought in, this would have been a more natural kind of neutral color, but I dipped it in some black walnut dye and things like some of the natural plants that people are really interested in using. Daylily leaves, iris leaves, nettles, things like that will have natural color already, but you can certainly add color.
One of our guests wanted to know if you could use alcohol ink.
I've not tried that, but I would think, that's got such a rich saturated color. That'd be really fun to try. Because looking here, you'll see the difference of the wet versus the dry. That is something that constantly kind of trying to bump up the color, because I love that color as much as the dry color.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you so much. I know I loved seeing this process, and I can tell from our chat that our guest did as well. Sally, thank you so much for showing. We are going to just transition over to Tom Tomasek, who is going to give us a pastel demonstration.
Hello, welcome back. This will be the pastel portion of the program today, and I'm going to do a demo on the fly, and I've prepared some panels ahead so that it will cover the process but speed things up a little bit to fit within our time constraints. I'd first like to start out with a little bit about the materials that I use. People have seen pastel sticks. A lot of people have seen sidewalk chalk. It's similar, except for with the pastels, the pigment is very saturated. You have several different types of pastels, as you can see here. These are the super hard pastels. I usually start with those and work my way up to the medium soft. And as you can see, the hand-rolled pastels are just super soft, and you're dealing with almost pure pigment at that point. So those are my tools. I put them onto a sanded paper. It actually comes in different grits, just like hardware sandpaper. And it also comes in different colors, so that as I show you the underpainting I'm going to do, for those who would like to just start with a color as an underpainting, you have that option with this material. When I paint outdoors on location, many times I adhere the paper to a rigid surface to create a painting panel, and just it helps out when you're out in nature painting, but not have to have paper taped to a different board. So those are the different variety of papers. The medium has really expanded over time, and there's a lot more options now than there were just a few years ago. So with that, I've taken the liberty of sketching in a few of the basic shapes of the scene that I'm going to paint today. And generally I start with making broad strokes on these areas. I'm just laying this color in place, and at some point when I get enough of the pigment put down, I take a stiff bristle brush and some odorless mineral spirits, and that dissolves the pastel, and it's almost like watercolor at that point. And you'll see that process, how that fills in the space, and then we'll go from there.
So Tom, I can hear the texture of the pastel on the paper. I haven't felt the paper, but does it have like a grit to it?
Oh, very good. Okay, yes. In fact, as I mentioned, you can now have options of ordering very fine all the way up to really, really coarse. And it's up to each individual artist. They find what they like to work with.
Sure.
And there was an early paper called Wallace that I pretty much trained on. And so I have adapted to the new papers. I find the grit that was most similar to that is what I tend to work on.
Sure. And for our viewers who are watching, you're seeing a body of work that is behind Tom of these miniature pastel paintings, which were created on plein air. And it might be a little bit hard to tell from scale, but each of the pieces are really a couple of inches to maybe 6 or 8 inches wide, a few inches tall. And if you do have the opportunity to view the exhibit online or in the gallery, you'll notice that each piece is actually titled with the date, and hopefully Tom will oblige us by telling us a little bit more about that choice.
Sure. I think one of the original questions we had for today was working on a small scale. Why did I choose that for this body of work? And one of the reasons is when you're painting outdoors on location, time constraints are just beyond what you can imagine. As we go about our daily life, we don't realize how fast the sun is moving through the sky. And to do an outdoor painting, you cannot work very large because the shadows, the lighting, everything changes so fast. And all of these were done usually at dusk or right near sunset. And that is the reason they're so small, because it changes even faster at that point. Anybody who has watched a nice sunset will realize that, oh, the clouds are lit, and then 2 minutes later, it's all gone. So with that, I'm gonna lay in a little bit more color here. Just for this underpainting.
And our viewers might have noticed that you and I have both been using the term painting and not drawing.
I'm glad you brought that up. It's a big argument in the art world, whether these are paintings or drawings. And I think at this point, I'm basically drawing with the pastel stick, but after I use the brush and the mineral spirits, it changes into a painting. And this surface allows you to do layer on top of layer, just as someone would with a canvas. So, this is a fairly quick representation of what I would do with an underpainting. And if you see the scene that I'm painting, you think, well, this is all green down here. But what I tend to do is look through the colors and put down what is the farthest away and then build up there from there. Now, the next step is the odorless mineral spirits. Basically, you're diluting this down and moving the pigment around. It gives you a foundation to work up from, basically. And the sandpaper really holds up to a lot of abuse and the solvent without breaking down, which is key.
It's beautiful to see how this changes. It feels like almost like a watercolor.
At this point, it really is. And some people do watercolor on this paper and let it dry and then build with pastel on top of that. So this is kind of my version of an underpainting. It's a little more detailed than what most people would think. Now, this takes a while to dry depending on the weather, but when it does, I've taken the liberty of having one that's dry. From here, I would go in and start putting in my sky color. And I would blend those in. And you could do the mineral spirits to slosh that around. And then this is what I talked about earlier, putting the color on top of the underpainting.
It's magic.
It tends to come into place. And what you'll end up with is something more like that at the end.
Oh, so can we show our viewers? This is sort of that's that initial first one. Let's bring that a little bit closer. So we're looking at the second step there. And then to see
A little more of a final product here.
that change and to see that underpainting of the ochre. It's really beautiful.
It's a great process. And it's fun for working outdoors on location. And it's very forgiving.
That's beautiful. Thank you for showing us all of the steps. I know for me, that was really exciting. So we're going to bring our Sally and Tom back together. And this is also an opportunity for our guests to ask questions as well. So a few of our guests have been putting questions into the chat and just kind of sharing how, someone said they love both of your demos. I did see, I think Barbara Nelovich is on there and she said she'd love to see the process, Sally, of the paper making. And I think Julia is just grabbing those up.
While we're waiting for those, you had asked earlier, and I deflected about what we want people to get from our artwork, or I'm using the collective there, but for myself, one of the things I struggled with was, should you really be doing more social commentary, more politically kind of generated artwork, and I've let go of that with the idea that sometimes we need respite. And years ago, a psychologist friend, I said, "Oh, you're doing such important work," and he turned it around and he said, "Well, you are too. Maybe people will, I'm working with people that are already broken, and maybe what you're doing is you're catching them before they get to me." And I thought, okay, I can make what I want to make. And
That's beautiful.
it feels really comfortable in terms of inviting people to slow down and look at detail. My friends are very forgiving that I'll get super stupid excited about something and take a picture of it, and I love my phone camera and say, look at this, and yeah, that's pretty cool.
I think that's one thing I've learned from Sally when we take hikes wherever we're at in Michigan or other places, that she has slowed me down a little bit to where I'm seeing things that maybe I was always looking at the broader views, the way my paintings come across, and she would be lagging behind, caught up in some details. So that's been good for me, I think.
Oh, I love that. And I was just thinking, Sally, when you were talking about the social commentary, and I think in the world that we're at, like a celebration of nature and even especially in a society that really is all about moving quickly and hyper productivity, actually just the opportunity to take respite and the opportunity to pause is really, really important. And the opportunity to give ourselves that moment of joy, I think it is really important, right?
There's a question from Linda.
Oh, wonderful.
So Linda can unmute whenever she would like, if she wants to ask it live.
If I'm unmuted, I just want to say thanks, Tom and Sally. We love your work. We really appreciate it. And your budding future artist has a picture to show you. Lucinda, show him. Tell him what it is. Tell him what it is. It's her sunset. She just drew from the pastels.
Oh, how wonderful. We're just going to bring this over so Tom and Sally can see.
It's very nice, Lou. Love to see it. Keep on working.
Thank you very much.
My great niece, Lucinda.
Oh, how wonderful.
We have a question from Yoshiko. I can read it to you.
Sure.
When you paint the sky, which was on the picture of this program, how do you start with what colors?
Well, I have some set colors for blue skies. They're pretty standard, and sometimes that changes. I usually it's a phthalo type blue, but then there are times where it's just ultramarine. It depends on the season we're in. And I find I'm really attracted to gray skies. Maybe it's because we're in Michigan and that's mostly what we see. but there's one color of the new pastels, and it's just the light blue, and almost all my normal blue skies are started with that.
Oh, one of our viewers had a question about the mineral spirits,
Mm-hmm.
and if that is used just for blending, or are there other ways to use that?
There could be other ways, and I've really just scratched the surface on this. You can keep washing the pastel in. Eventually, you will fill up the sandpaper, but you can do it multiple times with the mineral spirit, and it could be an interesting effect. It's a lot more painterly in the long run, and it's a way of blending the colors together. So.
Thank you. We had another question from Barbara Nolovich, who wanted you to touch on value versus color.
Okay. I'm not the best at it, but one of the things I've learned and I try to put into practice is that the value is more important than the actual color, because from a distance, the value is what draws a person, a viewer, to the piece of artwork. And it can be some odd color that may not be appropriate for the scene at all. I tend to be a little too literal at times, but if you look really closely at the paintings, you'll see that there are other things going on really in a smaller detail. So the value is important.
When I look at some of his paintings, oh, there's that lavender. I didn't know you had lavender. Oh, look, there's some red stuff going on there. And you don't necessarily pick up on it immediately. It's just a visual sensation that then you can kind of get in there. That's where the virtual is really not doing it the same as seeing something in reality.
I agree. One of our, so somebody was hoping that they will be able to see additional works from the exhibition. We do actually have a professional tour that will be able to walk you through, that will be we'll be publishing very soon, and it's really cool. It's like a virtual reality way of, it's like you're in the space. And again, I also wanted to let everyone know that they are welcome to come and see the exhibit in person if they feel comfortable by appointment. And one of our guests wanted to know, and I already know the answer to this, but Tom, could you use pastels in some of Sally's handmade paper?
Actually, there was one piece in the exhibit that we collaborated on, and I found the texture of the handmade paper just incredibly fun to work on. think Sally is retrieving it right now. As Sally mentioned, when her paper's dry, they lose some of the brightness of the pigment. So I enhanced this with some pastel sticks and had a great time.
So,
And
wait, I have a question. Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Sally, which comes first, the paper or the covers of your book? Because you have some very unusual covers for your books. So in one instance, which came first, the paper or the cover?
One book that's here in, well, two books, the covers came first, and they were pieces of driftwood or scavenged wood. And then I ended up shaping the decal. Remember the corral around the mold that made the paper? I could shape that. Hold that. This was a piece of wood on scrap pile up at the bio station up on Beaver Island. And it was something that I really was attracted to the texture. So then I made sheets of paper that fit that piece of wood and then made a bookboard cover. But this was kind of fun too, because I could gradate the color of the paper right in the vat by adding more of the plain white pulp, and as it blended in, it changed the coloration of the paper. But then here's the fun part when you get to see the different colors of the papers. But wood came first.
One of our guests, Sally, wanted to know about some of your smaller 2D, or I'm sorry, some of the framed works that are on the wall.
Just in general, question about them. Some of them were actually what I would view as sketches, but then I liked them enough that, here's Mr. Frame. Everything has to be framed. We have this running dialogue of, oh, that would look good in a shadow box. And I said, it doesn't have to be in a box. But I don't know what else to elaborate on that other than sometimes you do.
There's sweet little pieces that look great in a shadow box.
It does elevate them a little bit.
One of the things that we talked about during installation was how some of those works felt like they would be at home in a beautiful natural history museum or a cabinet of curiosities. And so when we installed, there was sort of that intention behind the installation.
And that's, I kind of play around with that idea of artifacts, and because they aren't true, objects that you would find in nature, I call them artifictions. And that also reminds me of a dear friend, a gardening buddy that said my work looked like it would look quite at home on the compost heap. And she meant that as a compliment, and I took it as a compliment because gardeners know how important compost is, but it was kind of funny. Sort of, what?
One of our guests said that concertina used with the paper stunning. Did you always intend to make it a 3D work, or did the paper lend itself to that?
It was part of a larger piece actually that got cannibalized. And I actually had a piece of wood that I was intending to use as the cover. And when I realized that I was forcing that piece of wood, and I ended up adhering a second piece of the same kind of a scrap that came off of the top part of this. And that's where, go back to the question of how do you know when a piece is finished? This one was definitely cannibal material that ended up really benefiting from the coloration that Tom added to it. We want to do more of this. I want him to be able to play around in the water with pulp. And it didn't happen yet, but when it gets nice and we can do it outside and spread out, his sense of landscape and the long horizontal is, just really perfect I think they'll have fun
I'm looking
playing.
forward to playing with
I can,
paper pulp, yeah.
I can see a potential more collaborations coming
I think
out
that's
of this.
the one good thing about art is just sitting down to play with materials.
Yeah.
It's more important than anything. I constantly preach that. You'll learn more by playing almost than any other way.
Just getting a sense for it.
Yeah.
You have to kind of get to know the rules before you break them.
I don't always sit down to create a piece of art. You just play with materials and you learn something along the way.
Sure. And just to let our guests know, I do actually have a video of Tom working on this particular piece, and I'll post that to our social media channels. So stay tuned after the artist talk. We have another question from one of our guests. Sally, how did you get the shape of the papers for the pages of that book with driftwood on top?
If you remember the mold that I did my demo with, is rectangular. If you cut duct tape and adhere that to the mold, it acts like a stencil, and then the pulp will form whatever shape that you give it. So it's fairly easy to do. And a lot of people that are more interested in a circular page, they'll use embroidery hoops and stretch some mesh with that. So you can kind of make whatever shape you want for your mold and your decal, or kind of cause it to be a shape that you want it to be.
That's so cool. I hadn't thought about that.
It's a real down and dirty. It's an easy way to do it. I kind of like that.
I really just want to get my hands in it now after watching and hearing all of this.
That's a good thing.
It is. Yeah, but just many people just saying thank you, and they've enjoyed this, and that they've loved being.
Well, thank you to you all that tuned in today and for the opportunity through the gallery.
Oh, it's been our pleasure. And just a reminder again, please, if you do feel comfortable, we're doing appointments for folks to come in and see the show. We're only having a few people in at a time, just for safety reasons. The show really is stunning, and if you feel comfortable, I would love to invite you on Tuesdays and Saturdays until the 23rd of this month to come in and see the exhibit. And of course, as we mentioned, we will be launching our virtual exhibit as well, which is a really, really fun way to see the show in the exhibit as well.
Charlene has a question about what's for sale.
Oh, thank you, Charlene, for asking. We do have works for sale both in the gallery as well as online at lansingartgallery.org. And I'm sure we could drop that link into the chat for everyone. And yeah, please come in. We have a variety of works from both of the artists, and you'll be able to pick them up after or have them shipped after the close of the exhibit. And Julia's just dropping in the link for our website. And on our website, you'll be able to find how to schedule an appointment as well as purchase work. Well, thank you both so much for coming today and doing this, and especially for the presentations. I think that was my favorite part. And I can tell from our chat that was definitely something that was really, really loved by our guests as well.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you all who joined us today. It was our pleasure to have you join us, and please stay tuned. We will be launching a series of artist talks for upcoming exhibitions as well.
Bye, Sally. Bye, Tom.
Bye.